One of the boys.
Watch it, I'm not in the mood for fooling around tonight.
You hear that, Margaret?
Captain John F.X. McIntyre.
What if the greatest emotional gut punch in television history came from a show that made you laugh? In the middle of a war zone, where helicopters roared and scalpels sliced through silence, MASH Asterisk gave us not just jokes, but truth. Beneath the laughs were real heartbreaks. It's hard to imagine American television without MASH star. It wasn't just a show. It was a touchstone that helped an entire generation process the scars of war through laughter, sorrow, and unforgettable honesty. What started as entertainment evolved into something much deeper. A mirror to society, a balm to wounded hearts, and a cultural milestone that dared to tell the truth about war with both humor and heartbreak. But behind its beloved characters and groundbreaking storytelling lay untold struggles, quiet exits, and personal battles that shaped the soul of MASH Asterisk and left viewers forever changed. The story of MASH Asterisk didn't begin on television. In 1968, a modest book titled MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors, was written by Dr. Richard Hooker, the pseudonym of Korean war surgeon Richard Hornberger. The novel painted a darkly humorous yet painfully real portrait of Army medics during the Korean War. It resonated deeply, blending satire with tenderness and brutality with compassion. Hollywood quickly took notice, and in 1970, director Robert Altman adapted it into a film starring Donald Sutherland and Elliott Gould. Amid the trauma of the Vietnam War, the film became a sensation. It was raw, absurd, hilarious, and devastating, all at once, striking a nerve with a nation in turmoil. The movie's success laid the foundation for the TV series, which premiered in 1972 on CBS. Developed by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, the television version retained the war backdrop but soon moved beyond satire, exploring the emotional toll of conflict. At the center of this evolution was Alan Alda as Captain Benjamin Franklin, Hawkeye Pierce. More than just a lead actor, Alda became the show's creative heart. He co-wrote and directed dozens of episodes and insisted that MASH Asterisk portray the realities of war without glorifying violence. His commitment shaped the show's tone, transforming it from a quirky sitcom into one of the most profound dramas in American television history. As the show grew in depth and audience, Alda remained the steady force behind its success. He helped audiences navigate increasingly mature storylines and ultimately crafted the unforgettable series finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, which drew over 100 million viewers in 1983, becoming the most watched broadcast in American TV history. That moment, with Hawkeye in a psychiatric ward, was a haunting reflection of buried trauma, an emotional climax no one else could have delivered with such honesty. Yet, as MASH Asterisk soared, its journey was marked by departures that shook fans and changed the show's direction. The first major loss was McLean Stevenson, who portrayed the well-meaning but overwhelmed Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake. Blake was more than a commanding officer. He was a symbol of kindness amid chaos. But Stevenson grew disillusioned as Alda's role expanded, and he yearned to be the central figure. Feeling sidelined, he left the show at its peak. The writers chose to end his story with shocking finality. In the season 3 finale, Radar walks into the ore and delivers the devastating news. Henry Blake's plane was shot down. There were no survivors. There was no music, no laughter, just silence. It was a groundbreaking moment in television history, a sitcom embracing tragedy, and it stunned the nation. Viewers flooded CBS with emotional reactions, and critics hailed it as a turning point in TV storytelling. Though Stevenson tried to recreate his success in other shows, none matched MASH star. His abrupt exit remains one of the most powerful farewells ever aired. Soon after, another key figure vanished, this time without even goodbye. Wayne Rogers, who played the clever and rebellious trapper John McIntyre, left the show after 3 seasons. He and Alda had created a dynamic duo, and fans adored their chemistry. But Rogers grew frustrated as the focus shifted more and more to Hawkeye. Despite being promised an equal role, he found himself relegated to psychic status. Disappointed by the creative direction and lacking a formal contract, Rogers simply walked away. Producers had no legal recourse. As a result, Trapper was written out with only a passing mention. His sudden absence marked a tonal shift for the show, moving from buddy comedy to emotional drama. Rogers would go on to reinvent himself in finance, eventually becoming a respected economic commentator. A rare story of walking away from fame and finding success elsewhere. One of the most heartfelt losses came later with the departure of Gary Burghoff, who played Radar O'Reilly. Radar was the show's innocent heart, a sweet-natured clerk who somehow always knew when helicopters were coming. With his earnestness and emotional honesty, Radar became the emotional lens through which many viewers experienced the war. But behind the camera, Burghoff was battling exhaustion and personal issues. The pressures of fame and long production days were taking a toll. He had taken breaks before, but by season 8, he knew he couldn't continue. The show gave him a proper farewell in a moving 2-part episode titled Goodbye Radar. In it, Radar returns to the 4077th, only to realize that the camp no longer needs him the way it once did. He decides to stay home in Iowa to care for his family. The moment he silently salutes Colonel Potter and walks away into the night is still one of the most emotionally devastating scenes in television history. Burghoff retreated from the limelight after his exit, focusing on art, nature, and family. Though his time on MASH Asterisk ended quietly, his legacy remains one of his most tender and enduring. Another departure that altered the show's rhythm was Larry Linville's exit as Major Frank Burns. Burns was a comic villain, arrogant, petty, and constantly at odds with the rest of the staff. Linville played him to perfection, but over time, the character failed to grow while others were allowed depth and complexity. Linville feared being typecast as a buffoon and chose to leave after season 5. His departure was handled off-screen, with Burns reassigned to a stateside post after a nervous breakdown. He was replaced by David Ogden Stiers as Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, a sophisticated and nuanced foil. Though Linville continued acting, none of his roles matched the fame of Burns. Off-screen, he was known as warm and generous, the complete opposite of his character. He passed away in 2000, leaving behind an unforgettable contribution to MASH *S legacy. David Ogden Stiers, who joined in season 6, brought elegance and depth to the series. His character, Winchester, was pompous yet intelligent, difficult yet surprisingly humane. Stiers' performance helped elevate the show's later seasons as MASH * leaned into introspection and emotional weight. Off-screen, he was an accomplished musician and voice actor, famously lending his voice to Disney films. He remained with MASH * until the finale, contributing some of the show's most moving storylines. When he passed away in 2018, tributes poured in for the man who gave Major Winchester such grace and complexity. He proved that even late additions to a show could become essential parts of its soul. Throughout the show's transformations, one woman stood firm: Loretta Swit as Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan. Initially introduced as a stiff, one-dimensional figure, Margaret was a punchline in the early years. But Swit refused to let her character remain shallow. Over 11 seasons, she turned Houlihan into a fierce, intelligent, and deeply human woman. No longer defined by her relationship with Frank Burns, she grew into a leader in her own right. Swit's portrayal helped redefine female characters in television, showing that strength and vulnerability could coexist. She was one of only 4 cast members to appear in both the pilot and finale, and her consistency gave the show a through line that anchored its emotional evolution. MASH * was more than a hit. It was a national event. Its format broke rules. No canned laughter, no easy jokes, and no shallow caricatures. It dared confront grief, trauma, and the absurdity of war. Over time, its stories matured alongside its characters, inviting viewers to laugh one moment and weep the next. When the series ended in 1983, it left a permanent mark on the American psyche. That finale, watched by more than 100 million people, was not just the end of a show. It was a closing chapter of a shared emotional journey. Behind every exit, whether quiet or explosive, was a deeper truth about fame, artistic integrity, personal pain, or emotional exhaustion. The cast of MASH * didn't just play roles, they lived them. Their departures weren't just plot twists. They were moments of real loss for fans who had grown up with them. The strength of MASH * lay not only in its writing or direction, but in the authenticity each actor brought to their role. and the courage to step away when the time came. For those who grew up with MASH asterisk, certain moments will never fade. Radar's quiet goodbye, the silence after Henry Blake's death, the final shot of Hawkeye looking down from a helicopter at the word goodbye spelled out in stones. These weren't just scenes. They were emotional touchstones, reminders of laughter found amid pain, of dignity in the face of chaos, and a show that changed what television could be. In honoring their stories, we honor something greater than entertainment. We honor memory itself. As MASH asterisk unfolded across 11 seasons, what began as an experiment in wartime satire evolved into one of the most emotionally intelligent series television has ever produced. Its longevity wasn't just due to clever writing or sharp performances. It was the ability to walk an impossible tightrope between comedy and tragedy, between absurdity and raw, unfiltered humanity. With every season, the series grew deeper, more reflective, and unafraid to sit in the uncomfortable silence that followed pain. A large part of this transformation was due to Alan Alda's insistence that MASH asterisk be honest about what war does to people. He often pushed back against scripts that treated violence lightly. He wanted viewers to laugh, yes, but not without understanding the cost of survival. He often said the goal wasn't to be anti-military, but to be pro-human. Alda made sure that the doctors and nurses at the 4077th weren't cartoon characters, but broken, brilliant, often weary people trying to make it through another day without losing their souls. Through this lens, MASH asterisk became a therapy session for a nation still reeling from the trauma of Vietnam. As time passed and new characters were introduced, the ensemble grew stronger, each edition carrying emotional weight and moral dimension. Mike Farrell's Captain B.J. Honeycutt replaced Trapper John not as a carbon copy, but as a different kind of man, more introspective, more devoted to family, yet equally impacted by the horrors around him. His quiet dignity became a natural counterbalance to Hawkeye's sarcasm. The relationship between the two was less about hijinks and more about brotherhood forged in shared grief. Similarly, Harry Morgan's Colonel Sherman T. Potter replaced the fallen Henry Blake as the new commanding officer. Where Henry was scattered and overwhelmed, Potter was sturdy, experienced, and compassionate. A seasoned military man who'd seen too much but never let it harden him. Morgan's presence brought a sense of grounded wisdom to the show, helping MASH asterisk mature in tone. His calm authority felt earned, and his warmth often anchored scenes that might have otherwise veered into despair. And then there was Father Mulcahy, portrayed by William Christopher, who embodied the show's spiritual core. His role could have been cliched or ornamental, but instead, Mulcahy became a lens through which the ethical and moral dilemmas of war were explored. He didn't preach from a distance. He was in the trenches, tending to the wounded, struggling with doubt, and praying not for victory but for mercy. His presence reminded viewers that even in war, compassion was a form of resistance. The finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired on February 28, 1983, and changed television history. With a staggering viewership of over 100 million. It wasn't just a goodbye to a show. It was a collective farewell to a cultural touchstone. The final episode allowed each character a moment of closure, with humor and sorrow threaded together like a final suture. Hawkeye's breakdown in the psychiatric ward, triggered by a suppressed memory of a tragic mistake, symbolized the deep psychological cost of war. It was harrowing, and for many, shockingly real. That final hour was more than a plot resolution. It was a ritual. It allowed America to grieve not only the end of MASH asterisk, but the collective experiences and traumas the show had mirrored back at them. As the camera panned out from the farewell message written in rocks, goodbye, viewers weren't just saying goodbye to the characters. They were saying goodbye to a time, to an emotional era, to a part of themselves that had grown up with those weekly visits to the 4077th. After the show ended, several cast members pursued other projects. Some succeeded, others struggled, but MASH asterisk never truly left them. The legacy remained not just in awards or reruns, but in the continued resonance of its themes. It inspired future medical dramas, war stories, and dramedies that tried to capture that elusive balance between laughter and loss. ER, Scrubs, The West Wing, and even Grey's Anatomy owe a debt to MASH asterisk as format, style, and moral compass. Yet the impact of MASH asterisk wasn't confined to Hollywood. For veterans, especially those of Korea and Vietnam. The show was often more honest than any documentary. It gave voice to feelings they couldn't articulate. It made space for laughter and pain, for humanity and horror. Even decades later, veterans speak of MASH Asterisk with reverence. It was one of the few portrayals of war that didn't reduce them to tropes. The show also holds a unique place in academic and media studies. Episodes like The Interview and Abyssinia Henry are analyzed in college courses as examples of storytelling that blurs genre lines and redefine the boundaries of what television can achieve. Its influence stretches beyond entertainment into the study of narrative ethics, historical trauma, and cultural memory. And today, MASH Asterisk continues to find new audiences. Streaming services have brought it to younger viewers, many of whom are astonished at how contemporary it still feels. In an age of cynicism and noise, the sincerity of MASH Asterisk, its willingness to be deeply human, feels revolutionary again. In the end, MASH Asterisk wasn't about war. It was about people. It was about what happens to soul when surrounded by senseless suffering, and how the smallest acts, humor, friendship, defiance, kindness, can become the fiercest acts of survival. It asked us to look beyond uniforms and politics and see the human being beneath. And it did so with such grace, such intelligence, and such heart that it became immortal. So for those who remember the choppers overhead, the sound of Radar's footsteps, the sharp crack of Hawkeye's jokes, or the steady voice of Colonel Potter in a storm, those moments didn't fade. They live on, because MASH Asterisk wasn't just about what it meant to be in a war. It was about what it means to be alive in a world that keeps asking us to forget our humanity, and how, against all odds, we remembered if these stories moved you. If you remember that moment when Radar stepped into the room, or when Hawkeye looked down at the word goodbye spelled in stones, tell us in the comments.